My wife had an affair with my stepfather in an attempt to steal our $1 million mansion, not realizing it was actually mine. We've been married for 7 years, and while our relationship has had its ups and downs, it has generally been quite normal. The downs mainly stemmed from my wife's belief that I was too close to my mother, even calling me a mama's boy. Since my mother passed away 2 years ago, I feel no need to defend her now that she's gone. I'm grateful I could love her as she deserved, as she raised me alone and gave me everything she could, even beyond her means. My mother met Andrew, my stepfather, 10 years ago. She was a single parent until she married him in her early 50s after his recent divorce. I never quite understood what Andrew's mother saw in him that made her want to marry him after 2 decades of single life. Although Andrew lived with my mother, I only interacted with him politely and never embraced him as a father figure. I felt relief when Andrew was not around during my mother's final days. His presence was a reminder of a relationship I couldn't accept. After my mother's funeral, I saw Andrew with my wife at a roadside cafe. The way they were seated together, with his arm around her, made me uneasy. Their body language and chemistry were troubling, especially given our complex family dynamics. For me, their closeness felt awkward, considering that my wife and stepfather had never been particularly close, and I had never been close to him either. I had left the office that day to catch up with an old friend, and I usually try to avoid such situations. Visiting the area where I had seen them was quite a trek from both my house and my office. I had gone there to see a friend, but my mind was elsewhere. Despite my friend's persistent questioning about whether something was bothering me, I only mentioned it was related to work. I couldn't bring myself to share what I had witnessed. When I got home, I addressed the situation directly with Tia, telling her that I had seen her with Andrew. Her reaction was immediate. She went pale and lost her words. After a moment, she explained that she had met him for lunch after running into him by chance. She sensed from my look that I had seen something I shouldn't have. Taya then mentioned that Andrew was hurt by the loss of my mother, and she had comforted him. She added that he was feeling lonely and had held her hands to express his sorrow. I didn't tell her that I had seen him holding her hands and putting his arms around her in a way that didn't seem like the actions of a grieving man. Their body language, although not overtly flirtatious, suggested a certain closeness. To avoid further confrontation, I chose to address the issue privately. Chia, who works weekends as a nail artist, had been preoccupied with her job, which had led to arguments between us. She claimed that after her mother's death, I had become overly needy. She also misunderstood my routine, as I used to visit my mother twice a week. Despite Chia's work schedule on her days off, I always made time to see my mom on weekends, which seemed to be overlooked. Back home, I tried to spend quality time with her. She used to argue about me being a mama's boy, but now she claimed I was always hungry. My frustration only grew when I saw her with my stepdad. A few weeks later, Thanksgiving arrived. Yes, last Thanksgiving. She insisted that we extend an invitation to Andrew, which caught me off guard. Andrew was living alone and had no one, she said, so as extended family, we should include him. She mentioned that he had nobody to celebrate with, and she compared it to how they had each other when my mum was alive. I pointed out that she never invited them when my mum was still around, but in the end, I gave in. I wanted to observe their behavior toward me, even though I already knew the truth. While they didn't do anything overtly strange, my suspicions made me increasingly resentful of Andrew's presence. It was a tense dinner, with both of us eating in silence. The conversation felt forced, and I noticed their attempts to make polite small talk didn't quite mask the underlying tension. I began to plot. Although it was difficult to bear the weight of my feelings, I initially considered checking her phone, but decided against it to avoid raising suspicion. Instead, I came up with another plan. I told her I would be working out of town for several days. I left early on the day I had planned, heading to my office as usual. However, before leaving, I had secretly installed a GPS device in her car and was monitoring her location from a distance. She drove Andrew to his house just before lunchtime. I wanted to catch her in the act, but worried that I might end up looking foolish if I didn't proceed carefully. They were just sitting and talking when I arrived. I asked my friend Keith for help and suggested he go see Andrew, expressing my concerns. I thought it was a safe approach, so I advised Keith to document anything unusual. The house's front door was password protected, so I suspected Andrew hadn't updated the PIN. I told Keith to say the front door was open and that he was just checking on Andrew, in case Andrew accused him of sneaking in. There was a small side tunnel leading straight into the living room, so no one would find the unlocking suspicious. Keith agreed to this plan and went in. He searched the corridor but couldn't find anyone. When he peeked into the bedroom, he discreetly recorded with his phone, which he had kept in his shirt pocket, with the camera peeking out. He saw Andrew and Shia in an embrace without clothes. Keith quickly started crying and apologized, then left the house. Outside, Andrew asked what he was doing there, and Keith said he was just checking in, but would come back later. To avoid conflict, Keith got into his car and drove off. Unfortunately, Keith had left the front camera on the entire time, so all that was recorded were Andrew and Shia yelling at him for his unexpected appearance. Despite the mishap with the camera, I still got the evidence I needed. I had already packed clothes and toiletries, so I went to Keith's place. He asked me to stay with him until things were sorted out since his wife was away at her parents' house. She knew Keith would have shown me the truth and messaged me, wondering when I'd be home. I told her I was out of town for work, ignoring her calls and texts. She's been bombarding my phone with messages for the past 4 days. Since I never want to see her again, I've taken steps to remove her from my home and have her served with divorce papers. The attorney I contacted sent the paperwork, but 10 days later, the CIA wanted to discuss the situation, and she was not ready to sign. My lawyer suggested pursuing an out-of-court settlement to save time and costs. Given my busy schedule as a salesperson and my limited budget for legal fees, I agreed to meet with her in the presence of my lawyer. Despite my objections, she insisted on a private conversation. My attorney, Ed, advised me to proceed under strict conditions. No hugging, no touching, and no confessions. Her presence was unsettling, and I pushed her away when she tried to hug me. She claimed everything was a misunderstanding and that her actions were meant to help an elderly man cope with loneliness. I responded, "Sure, you were just trying to help him." She insisted it was merely snuggling, though she admitted that Keith's observations were accurate. She argued that hugging naked is natural, but then claimed her actions were to protect our future. According to her, if I married someone else, that person would inherit the family wealth, which my mother had left to Andrew. She implied that her actions might lead to her becoming my stepmother and thus inheriting my mother's fortune. The conversation was overwhelming, and I quickly left the meeting. My attorney then asked for details on the situation. When I got back, I gave him everything I could. Although he was momentarily thrown off, he became curious about the inheritance my mother had left. Mom had bequeathed a grand mansion, a property far beyond my means. Shea had always kept an eye on that mansion and even insisted that we move in there after we married. She wanted her mother to move out of my apartment while we occupied the mansion, but I was reluctant. I didn't see why her mother should have to leave just because we were moving. Kia argued that, as the only son, the house should naturally come to me, and she pushed for us to move in right away. This led to many arguments between us. One day I lied, telling her that Mom had willed the house to Andrew, not to me. That lie caused me significant trouble, as Kaya pursued my stepfather to claim ownership of the mansion. Kia was unaware of another crucial detail. I hadn't officially transferred the house into my name after Mom passed away. Andrew wanted to stay in the house until he decided otherwise, and transferring the title to me would have meant he'd be living on my property, which he might not have liked. The process was also expensive, and at the time I was short on funds. I was also relieved I didn't transfer it because, had I done so, Kia would have been entitled to half of the mansion in the event of a divorce. In any case, Kaya's infidelity was a constant, regardless of the mansion. When she suggested that I reconsider the divorce, claiming she could persuade Andrew to give her the house and that we could have the mansion if I stayed with her, I laughed off her offer. I said no thanks and wished her luck with the mansion. "You're losing a lot with this divorce," she said with a smirk. I replied, "I don't give a damn." I wasn't sure if she was genuinely clueless or just trying to save face, but it didn't matter much to me, except for the savings in our joint account, which we had split. She knew I didn't have any substantial wealth after the divorce. I actually felt a sense of relief. Kia would never have left me if she had been honest about the mansion's ownership. Kia had dug her own grave by revealing her true intentions behind dating Andrew. I planned to use that information to drive Andrew away from her during the divorce proceedings. I watched as Andrew helped her with all the legal matters, just waiting for the divorce to finalize so I could burst her bubble. Now that it was done, my next step was to destroy Kia. Once the divorce was official, I sent Andrew the details of Kia's confession. "You know your mom is leaving you the mansion, right?" I asked. "Yes, I have her will," he replied. I told him, "But Kia doesn't know that she's going to ask you for the mansion." Revealing the truth wasn't meant to help him. I just wanted to shatter Kia's illusions. She'd been dreaming of owning my mother's property, while Andrew told me she'd been subtly asking about his will and who would inherit his assets. Though he didn't have much to offer, I cut off the conversation because I wasn't interested in bro code with Andrew. Soon after, I got a call from Kia. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, but I knew what it was about. On the other end, she was screaming, "Why didn't you tell me your mother left the house to you? You've ruined everything." I felt a bit of satisfaction, knowing I had finally pushed her to her breaking point. Here's a revised version of the passage. "Your property, by pandering to that old man, clearly fueled her insults, which stemmed from her own hurt. I simply laughed them off and replied, 'Thanks so much and good luck with your gold-digging approach.' Then I ended the call and blocked her. A few days later, she reached out again from an unknown number, possibly a friend's or co-worker's phone. She told me Andrew had ended their relationship after discovering she was with him solely for his inheritance. He had realized the truth and deemed her as greedy despite her claims of helping him with his loneliness. Her true intentions were already exposed, so I couldn't understand why she was still trying to present herself as a virtuous woman. I responded with skepticism, "Oh yes, you've selflessly slept with everyone just for the sake of others, with no ulterior motives at all." She claimed that dating Andrew was meant to benefit me, to secure the mansion for me, and insisted she was only trying to support him through his grief and loneliness, portraying herself as having a pure soul. Despite her claims, she continued to make every effort to contact and attack me, sometimes begging, other times trying to gaslight me into reconciling. She showed up at my home, my workplace, and even frequented public places I visited. Unbelievably, she even tried to corner me for a conversation at my gym. I treated her as a stranger, given our divorce was finalized. It was a nightmare dealing with her persistence, but once I transferred the mansion's ownership to my name, I felt the story was finally over. Her obsession with the house was baffling. Who wouldn't want $1 million residence in their name? I'm just not sure how long it would take her to accept reality. 6 months into the divorce, I decided to change the "Here's a rewritten version of the text for clarity." Regarding the mansion, I hadn't made any progress before, as I previously mentioned, due to insufficient funds for the ownership transfer. However, now that I am separated and my expenses have decreased significantly, I anticipate being able to save for the transfer in about 4 to 5 months. I informed Andrew of my plans before I applied for the transfer. Once I discovered his affair with Kaya, he moved out of the house. Although I asked him to stay, he decided to remove his remaining belongings and did so. He also assigned me some administrative duties, including maintenance of the locking system. The documentation for the transfer was delayed by a few months. In the meantime, I had the house repainted and cleaned, as the pool and lawn had been neglected for a long time. I had no contact with Kia, and based on our last conversation, Andrew had also ended his relationship with her. One day, while the house was being cleaned, Kia appeared on the property, which puzzled me. When I wasn't there, the housekeeping manager called to inform me that a woman had arrived, claiming to be my wife and wandering around the premises. The staff, assuming she was a trespasser due to her behavior, laughed and tried to stop her. I clarified that I had no wife and instructed them to remove her from the property. They followed my orders and confirmed by phone that she had left. Predictably, Kia later showed up at my house, accusing me of abandoning her and claiming she had done nothing wrong. She was yelling and crying. I advised her to seek therapy and consider a mental health facility rather than coming to my home. I refused to let her inside and firmly shut the door. She hadn't been violent, so her chances of sneaking into or damaging the location were minimal. Still, I didn't fully trust her, and I needed to act to safeguard the rights of the new occupants. I hoped she wouldn't cause any unnecessary disturbances. So far, things have gone smoothly. I hope to wrap up this chapter soon and move on with my life. Thanks for following along. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more surprising real-life stories happening around you.